Ethan smoothed out the wrinkles on his wool coat as he stepped onto the marble steps of the Tudor-style mansion located in Greenwich. This was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in America, where perfectly manicured lawns stretched right down to the water's edge of the Long Island Sound. Ethan had been to this mansion countless times over the past 2 years, but tonight his intuition told him something was off. The awkwardness in the voice of Olivia, his wife, when she called to invite him to the family dinner made his jaw clench. The solid oak front door opened before he could even knock. Victoria, his mother-in-law, stood there, a string of pearls around her neck reflecting the light of the baccarat crystal chandelier. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the cold, polite smile characteristic of the East Coast elite, reserved for guests they couldn't politely turn away. "Oh, Ethan," she said, stepping back with a sarcastically polite gesture. "How wonderful that you could spare some of your free time to join us." Ethan just nodded, keeping a calm expression as he entered the foyer. The walnut floor gleamed beneath Persian rugs, and light illuminated the family portraits hanging along the hallway. Absolutely none of the photos included him. The grand dining room of the Greenwich mansion glowed under the honey-gold light of a baccarat crystal chandelier worth tens of thousands of dollars. On the long mahogany table, intricately carved solid silver cutlery lay neatly next to paper-thin crystal glasses. The air was thick with the scent of white truffles, seared ribeye steaks, and the most defining scent of the East Coast elite. The stench of condescension, the moment Ethan pulled out his chair and sat next to Olivia. The lively chatter among the Sterling family members abruptly died down. They looked at him with the kind of gaze usually reserved for an unfortunate stain on an expensive hand-woven rug. Arthur sat at the head of the table, as authoritative as an emperor holding court. His platinum hair meticulously slicked back without a single stray strand, he looked his son-in-law up and down, a half-smile stretching the wrinkles on his face. "Here is our main character," Arthur spoke up, breaking the silence. 7 months now, isn't it? Ethan, I'm beginning to wonder if that sofa at home has some magical pull that keeps you from getting up and finding a decent job, Preston. Ethan's brother-in-law laughed out loud. He was sporting a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light every time he moved his wrist to cut his beef. "You have to be sympathetic to Ethan, Dad. After being bounced from Wall Street, a man needs plenty of time to heal his soul," Preston said, deliberately emphasizing the word heal with vicious mockery. He speared a piece of bloody red meat and chewed it ravenously. But then again, for a man to let his wife carry the financial burden for over half a year requires a very special kind of thick-skinned audacity. Ethan slowly spread the pristine white linen napkin over his lap. He did not talk back. The anger he had felt in the first few months had now been replaced by a chilling calmness. He sat there, as quiet as a scientist observing fat white mice running around in the cage of their own illusions. Speaking of audacity, Victoria gracefully changed the subject, though it was actually to deliver another stab. "Has everyone seen the pictures of Preston's new penthouse in Tribeca? Unobstructed views of the Manhattan skyline, 4-meter-high ceilings. Absolutely stunning. It cost a pretty penny, Mother," Preston smirked smugly, taking a sip of Napa Valley red wine. "The HOA fees alone are $8.00 a month. That's a whole year's rent for the peasants in the slums. But once you step into the upper class, you can't be petty with your calculations. You have to spend money to buy class. That is the clear boundary between those born to win and the mass of failures who only know how to beg." "Preston is absolutely right, Harper." The youngest sister, who had been glued to the screen of her newest iPhone until now, suddenly chimed in. She smoothed a lock of her blonde hair and shot a sidelong glance at Ethan. "Successful people know how to use their brains to make money generate more money, while some people just use the label husband of the Sterling daughter to freelance off the hard work of others." The words were like poisoned needles shot straight into the room. The atmosphere was so suffocating you could cut it with a knife. Ethan grasped the stem of his wine glass, swirling it gently so the ruby-red liquid sloshed inside. He turned his eyes to Olivia, his wife. This was the moment when any self-respecting wife would stand up to defend her man, but Olivia just sat shrunken in her carved chair. She bit her lower lip so hard it almost bled, her eyes avoiding Ethan's gaze, staring intently at the plate of grilled asparagus as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Her hand timidly reached under the table, finding Ethan's hand and giving it a gentle squeeze, a squeeze in place of a feeble apology, a cowardly concession. He gently pulled his hand away from hers, since when had silence become her default reflex to her family's cruelty? They were insulting his pride, trampling on his dignity at the very dinner she invited him to. And she chose to be complicit through her silence to protect the Sterling family's fake facade. The disappointment within Ethan had frozen into a permanent block of ice. Arthur lightly tapped his silver fork against his crystal glass, drawing the table's attention. "Now a toast," his voice boomed, echoing with authority. "Congratulations to Preston on his new real estate. My boy has never brought shame to the Sterling name, making his own money, buying his own house, taking charge of his own life, unlike someone who is blessed enough to live in a $15 million mansion in Greenwich, enjoying the air of the ultra-rich without bearing a single cent of the mortgage, yet still doesn't know his place." He looked straight at Ethan, his eyes containing naked contempt, sharp as a scalpel. The whole family raised their glasses in unison, the clinking of crystal creating a symphony of ultimate arrogance. They laughed, they mocked. They relished the feeling of superiority while trampling on the man they firmly believed to be an incompetent freeloader in a mansion owned by the Sterling bloodline. Little did they know, the man sitting in silence, sipping his bitter wine, was not looking at them with humiliation. He was looking at them with the eyes of the Grim Reaper, slowly turning to the final page in the book of life and death. Through the fabric of his suit jacket, Ethan could feel the warmth of the manila envelope. The bomb's timer was set. And these arrogant fools were counting down their own final seconds with their own hands. The dinner moved on to dessert. Plates of creme brulee, carrying the faint scent of Madagascar vanilla and scorched sugar, were carefully placed before each person by the servers. But the sweetness of the dish could not dispel the suffocating atmosphere. Thick with the malice enveloping the room, Victoria used her silk napkin, embossed with the Sterling family crest, to dab the corners of her bright red lips. Her eyes swept across the table, taking in Ethan's submissive silence like a trophy. But even that didn't seem enough to satisfy the upper-class lady's craving to trample on him. She gave a subtle nod to the butler standing in the corner of the room. He stepped forward and placed a silver tray on the marble table, upon which lay a crisply printed invoice. "Dear Ethan," Victoria began. Her voice was smooth, sugar-coated, but filled with crushed glass inside. "You've been awfully quiet. Actually, bringing this up in the middle of a family dinner is a bit abrupt of me. But I think this is a good opportunity for you to show a little backbone." Ethan unhurriedly placed his silver spoon down on the plate and looked up at his mother-in-law. "Go ahead, Mother." Victoria picked up the invoice, sliding it lightly across the smooth table surface. The paper stopped right in front of Ethan. "As you know, winters in Greenwich are very harsh. The geothermal heating system of this mansion is old, and your father just called in contractors to overhaul the whole thing. The cost is around $65,000. She paused for a beat, deliberately letting that massive number hang in the air, weighing down on the shoulders of a man who had been unemployed for 7 months. "Of course, we always take care of the big expenses. I'm not asking you to shoulder the entire thing, but you are also enjoying the warmth of this house, enjoying the shelter without bearing any mortgage burden. I think you should pay this bill. Just consider it rent, or at the very least, a way for you to retain a shred of manly self-respect in front of your wife." Her words dropped like a fatal slash. This was not a request. This was an impeccably calculated humiliation. She knew full well that a man who had just lost his job on Wall Street and had been relying on his wife for over half a year couldn't magically produce $65,000 in cash just to fix a heater. She wanted to back him into a corner, either bow his head, admit his poverty and apologize, or hold out his hand and beg her own daughter for money. Right at the dinner table, Preston smirked, nudging his elbow into the chair cushion. Harper covered her mouth and giggled, her eyes flashing with excitement at watching a good show. Arthur crossed his arms, leaning back to await his son-in-law's humiliation, and Olivia, his wife, still hadn't looked up. Her hands gripped the napkin on her lap so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew very well he didn't have that kind of money. She knew her mother was ruthlessly murdering her husband's dignity, but she still chose the safety of silence. Ethan stared at the invoice bearing the contractor's logo. He stroked the edge of the paper. In that moment, he felt no outrage. Flaring anger would eventually fade, but what was spreading through his veins right now was absolute, still, and lucid coldness. Any last shred of hope that this family possessed a moral boundary had been completely extinguished. Enough was enough. Ethan laughed, a soft, low, but distinct laugh. The laugh caused the triumphant smile on Victoria's lips to falter slightly. "Pay the maintenance cost for this house's heating system?" Ethan repeated the question, slowly raising his deep, abyssal black eyes to look straight at his mother-in-law. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, forming a smile devoid of any warmth. "What misunderstanding? Are you trying to dodge it, or are you going to ask Olivia to swipe her card for you?" Preston slammed his hand on the table, irritated by Ethan's completely fearless attitude. "I am perfectly capable of writing a check for $65,000 right now without blinking." Ethan leisurely reached into the pocket of his suit jacket, his steady voice beginning to carry a heavy, oppressive weight that crushed the noise in the room. But I'm afraid our family is operating under a fatally disastrous misunderstanding of basic real estate legal concepts. Arthur furrowed his brows into a thin line. What the hell kind of language are you speaking? Ethan's hand emerged from his jacket pocket, bringing with it a carefully sealed manila envelope. He placed it neatly next to his dessert plate and pushed the $65,000 invoice back toward Victoria. According to the current real estate laws of the state of Connecticut, Ethan tapped his index finger lightly on the envelope, the sharp sound echoing in the silent space. Structural maintenance, heating system overhauls, and depreciation of fixed assets are the legal responsibility and financial obligation of the homeowner. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp as a scalpel, sweeping over each of the Sterling family's faces, which were slowly shifting from annoyance to confusion. And you people are nothing more than tenants whose lease is about to expire. The phrase tenants dropped into the middle of the dinner table like a block of lead thrown onto a frozen lake. Dead silence. Not a clink of cutlery, not a whisper. Even the sound of breathing seemed to have been sucked dry from the luxurious dining room. It took several seconds for Arthur's brain to process the blasphemy he had just heard. He slammed his palm hard onto the mahogany table, making the crystal glasses rattle violently. What the hell are you babbling about, Ethan? His voice hissed, his face red with fury. Are you insane? You dare call us tenants in the Sterling family's own home? He really is insane. Dad, call security to drag him out by his neck. Preston lunged forward, snatching his napkin and throwing it onto his chair. Ethan didn't even blink at the outburst. He slowly reached out and broke the seal thread of the manila envelope. The sound of tearing paper rang out dryly and distinctly. He pulled out a stack of pristine white documents, the ink still sharp, the top left corner stamped with the glaring red seal of the Connecticut State Land Records Office. I never babble when it comes to numbers. Mr. Arthur, Ethan said, his tone calm but as steely as a sword drawn from its sheath. He took the stack of papers and slid it across the smooth table surface. The stack glided to a stop right in front of his father-in-law. Especially numbers that are backed by black ink on white paper. Arthur glanced at the stack of papers, initially intending to sweep them away, but the bold capital words were deed instantly locked his gaze. 2 years ago, Ethan began to speak, his timbre resonating throughout the massive room, neither fast nor slow, stripping away any attempt from anyone to interrupt. Your stock brokerage firm got caught up in a margin trading scandal that resulted in a massive bad debt of nearly $20 million. To avoid the SEC breathing down your neck and to stop the press from exposing the Sterling family's downfall, you needed a massive amount of cash. Immediately, Arthur's complexion began to change. The hot blood rushing to his face suddenly drained away, leaving a pale ashen gray. Victoria sat petrified in her chair, her eyes wide open, revealing sheer terror. How could he possibly know this monumental secret? You secretly sold off this Greenwich mansion outright, Ethan continued, each word like a sledgehammer striking the Sterling family's arrogant facade. But because you didn't want the East Coast elite to know your family had gone bankrupt, you sold it to a blind trust through a series of shell companies in the Caymans with a top-secret clause attached. The Sterling family retained the right to a long-term lease to maintain the illusion of wealth. Harper, the youngest sister, dropped her phone onto the floor. Preston's jaw hung open, staring blankly from Ethan to his father, waiting for a booming denial. But Arthur just sat there, trembling, cold sweat beginning to bead on his wrinkled forehead. His silence was the clearest confession. You've always been so smug. Ethan tilted his head, the corners of his lips curling into a cold smile. You still threw parties. Still beat your chest, proudly claiming to be the master of this $15 million estate. But do you know what the flaw of a blind trust is? It's that you will never know who actually poured the money in to buy this house, because every transaction goes through proxy lawyers. At this, Ethan stood up straight, his shadow cast long upon the wood-paneled wall, imposing and completely overwhelming. He pointed his finger toward the last page of the contract that Arthur was holding with violently trembling hands. Turn to Appendix Number 3. The section for sole beneficiary. Arthur clumsily flipped through the pages. The rustling of the paper sounded like crushed dry leaves, and then his eyes stopped at the bold text at the very bottom. His jaw dropped, his breath caught in his throat. The name appeared distinctly, proudly. Ethan Wright. What is this? Impossible, Victoria whispered, snatching the paper from her husband's hands. When she saw her son-in-law's name, she staggered backward, bumping into the armrest of her chair, her face contorted, unable to process the sheer magnitude of the shock. How do you have $15 million in cash? Preston stammered, his arrogant demeanor from earlier when he was bragging about his $8.00 a month penthouse now making him look as pathetic as a clown. You were fired from Wall Street. You're an unemployed freeloader. I never said I was fired, Ethan replied, his tone as sharp as a razor. I said I left my position as a hired executive. I left because I had raised enough capital to establish my own private equity fund. During the 7 months you called me an unemployed freeloader, I was busy acquiring 3 health tech companies and managing my real estate assets, including the very place you are sitting in. The dinner table was now like a battlefield after a bombing raid. Every illusion of superiority, every insult, every weapon the Sterling family had used to attack Ethan had been broken and plunged right back into them. Therefore, Ethan reached up to button his suit jacket, his cold eyes sweeping over their faces, now drained of every drop of blood. That $65,000 heater repair bill, leave it on the table. The landlord will pay it. As for you lot, you better start worrying about the security deposit for a new place to live. The silence enveloping the luxurious dining room was no longer the quiet refinement of the noble upper class, but the deathly silence of people who had just been stripped bare of their arrogant facade. Every illusion of class, every insult, every weapon the Sterling family had used to attack Ethan had been broken and shoved right back down their throats. Preston's mouth hung open, his jaw dropping pathetically. The phony millionaire with his 8,000 HO penthouse was now sitting shrunken in his chair, not daring to breathe heavily. Harper was trembling so badly she dropped her phone onto the walnut floor. The dry crack of shattering glass rang out, but she didn't even bother to bend down and pick it up. And Olivia, the wife who had sat as still as a statue throughout the entire meal, now opened her tear-filled eyes wide. She looked at Ethan, but her gaze swept over him as if she were looking at a complete stranger. Tears of shock began to stream down over her perfect makeup. Ethan, what is this? Why did you never tell me? Olivia sobbed, her voice trembling and broken. You own such a massive fortune. Why did you hide it from me? Tell you for what? Ethan turned to look at his wife. In his abyssal black eyes there was no hatred, nor was there triumph, only the bone-chilling coldness of a dead sea. He slipped both hands into his trouser pocket, his demeanor relaxed but utterly dominant. So that you and your family would love me for the fortune I have and not for who I am. Money is a magnificent prism, Olivia. It reflects people's true nature in the most naked way. I stayed silent, accepting the role of a failure for the past 7 months, just to see where the limits of this family's loyalty lay. Ethan swept his gaze over a pale Victoria and an Arthur who was panting from humiliation. If I had bragged about being a millionaire who owned this house, your mother surely wouldn't have shunned me. And your father wouldn't have called me a freeloader. You people would be groveling again, pouring expensive wine and praising me as the savior of the Sterling bloodline. But I don't need family ties bought with money. From his breast pocket, he pulled out a thin piece of paper folded in thirds and dropped it lightly onto the table. The paper slid right in front of Arthur. You're proud of this house? No need to worry about the heater repair bill anymore. This morning, my lawyer officially served a notice of lease termination. The penalty clause for breaking the lease early has already been wired straight into the management company's account. Are you going to throw us out on the streets? Arthur wheezed, his voice hoarse like a tyrant who had just lost his throne. You can't do that. Everyone in Greenwich knows we are the owners of this house. I am merely exercising my legal right to control my property. Ethan replied curtly, betraying not a sliver of pity. You have exactly 30 days to pack your things and vacate my house. Go find yourselves a new place that suits the true class of the Sterling family. Ethan, you can't be this cruel. Olivia suddenly sprang up, rushing over to grip his sleeve tightly. Her streaming tears smudged her expensive mascara. This is my family, our family. You can't back them into a corner like this. Ethan cast his eyes down at his wife's trembling hand, then slowly raised his own hand, gently but firmly peeling each of her fingers off his suit. A soft gesture, yet carrying the most brutal rejection. No, Olivia. Ethan's voice dropped, carrying the scars of a hurt that had completely scabbed over. Family is where people protect each other when the storm hits. As for you, what did you do? Olivia froze, her trembling lips unable to utter a word. You let them turn me into a joke. Let them mock my self-respect just to protect their phony facade. When your mother threw a $65,000 bill in my face to humiliate me, where were you? When your brother called me a freeloader clinging to his wife's skirt, what did you do? Ethan pierced her with every word, stabbing straight into her cowardice. You had 7 months, hundreds of opportunities to speak up and defend the man of your life. But you chose silence, and now I choose to leave. Ethan took out one final, compact envelope, crisp and pristine white, placing it gently on the table, right next to where Olivia was standing. I've already signed the divorce papers. My premarital assets have nothing to do with you, and I have no desire to claim back what I've provided. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow morning. He rebuttoned his suit jacket, ignoring Olivia's choked, bursting sob. nor bothering to look back at Arthur's pathetic collapse or Victoria's dazed shock. The play of the status-obsessed had finally reached its curtain call. Ethan turned on his heel and walked away. The sound of his signature leather heels tapped steadily on the walnut floor, echoing down the hallway lined with portraits he had never belonged in. As the solid oak doors closed behind him, the crying and bitter, blame-filled arguments of the Sterling family were instantly left behind. The night wind from the Long Island Sound swept in, bringing the signature chill of an American autumn. Ethan took a deep breath. Welcoming the freezing yet incredibly refreshing air, he stepped into the idling car waiting on the gravel driveway. A serene smile forming on his lips, every burden had been completely lifted. The Greenwich night sky was vast and tranquil, welcoming a man who had permanently stepped out of a cage of illusions, free to walk upon his very own kingdom.